Winter had always been my favorite season, but this year it felt different. Colder, more unsettling. The footprints had returned. I stood at my kitchen window, staring out at the backyard, where the snow lay untouched except for those unmistakable imprints. Bare feet. Human. Leading from the tree line to the side of my house, just beneath the bedroom window where my fiancée, Emma, still slept. My stomach twisted. This was the third time this winter. The first time, I thought it was some drunk lost in the woods. The second time, I thought it might be a prank. Maybe some kids from town messing around, but now I wasn't so sure. I stepped outside, my boots crunching in the ice. The prints were fresh. Whoever had been here had come sometime in the night. I followed them to the edge of the woods, heart pounding, rifle in hand. But they disappeared into the thick brush, swallowed up by the trees. I wasn't stupid enough to go chasing after them, not alone. But I knew one thing for certain. Someone or something was watching us and they weren't going away. That night I barely slept. Emma knew something was wrong, but I didn't tell her the full story. What was I supposed to say? Oh, don't worry, honey. It's just the barefoot man who likes to stand outside our window at night. No, that wouldn't help. I stayed up, late, sitting by the window with my rifle in my lap. The house was silent, the world outside even more so. Then, at around 2 a.m., I heard it. A single, deliberate knock on the front door. Not loud, not aggressive, just a knock. I froze, breath catching in my throat. My hands tightened around the rifle. I waited, listened. Another knock. Emma stirred upstairs. If she woke up and came down here, she'd panic. I had to handle this alone. Stood, moving toward the door, then hesitated. The security camera. I grabbed my phone and opened the app that connected to the front door camera. The feed was grainy, but clear enough. And there he was, a tall, thin figure standing barefoot on our front porch, head slightly tilted, as if he was listening. His skin was pale, almost translucent in the camera's night vision. He wore nothing but tattered shorts, despite the freezing temperature. His feet were red, raw from the ice. But the worst part? He was smiling. I didn't open the door. I didn't move. I just watched, my heart slamming against my ribs. After a few seconds, the figure took a step back, then another. And then, slowly, he turned and walked back toward the trees, disappearing into the darkness. That was the night I decided to fight back. The next morning, I called Theo, my oldest friend and an experienced tracker. He arrived within hours, armed and ready. Together, we followed the footprints into the woods. For hours, we hiked deeper than I had ever gone before. The snow was thick, the trees looming. And then, suddenly, the prints stopped. Just like that. As if whoever we were tracking had vanished. Into thin air. I turned to Theo, my breath fogging in the cold. "What the hell?" He didn't answer. He was staring at something. I followed his gaze. There, nailed to a tree, was a small bundle wrapped in dried leaves. I stepped closer, reached out, and peeled the layers back. Inside was my wallet, and Emma's hairbrush. Theo and I turned back immediately. We half ran through the woods, knowing we were being followed. The feeling of eyes boring into my back was unbearable. By the time we reached my house, the sun was setting. I locked every door, closed every curtain. I sat by the window, rifle in hand, waiting. They didn't come that night, but the footprints did. And this time, there were more of them. I don't even know if this is the right place to share my story, but I need to put it out there. I've told everyone, my family, my neighbors, my friends, even random news outlets, but it's never enough. No matter how many times I recount, the fear lingers. I feel an obligation to warn people, to let them know what's out there. So here it goes. It all started years ago. I can't say the exact year off the top of my head, but I'd guess 2012 or maybe 2013. Back then, I was in my mid-20s, living a stable life with my girlfriend, who's now my fiancée. I never went to college, so I had been in the workforce for years and didn't have any drastic changes coming my way. That's why I stayed close to home. We had just moved into my childhood home, a brick house my parents had passed down to me. It had been in my family for generations. The house was old, even after renovations, and its brick structure made it stand out in our quiet, wooded neighborhood. Ours was the last lot on the street, bordering the forest on two sides. A forest so vast that even after years of exploring it as a kid, I never reached its end. It was an isolated, peaceful place, perfect for someone like me who preferred solitude. But peace didn't last long. It was winter, and I remember waking up early one Sunday morning to grab a coffee. I walked outside to my truck, but something in the snow stopped me. Footprints, fresh ones, leading from the woods directly to my driver's side door. They didn't curve toward the house or any windows. Whoever left them had walked straight from the forest to my truck, then turned around and walked right back. My first thought was that my girlfriend had been outside, but the trail didn't lead back to the house. I asked her about it later, but she had no idea. It was unsettling, but I shrugged it off. Maybe a lost hiker, a prank? I let it go. Then 2 winters later, it happened again. But this time it was worse. I stepped outside one morning and froze. There were footprints everywhere. They circled the house, stopping by every window, every door. It was as if someone had been watching us, examining the house, looking for a way in. My stomach twisted. I ran around the property to check for intruders, but no one was there. My girlfriend was still inside, unaware. I texted her a warning and drove to work, but I couldn't focus. I left early, anxious to get home. By the time I returned, my girlfriend had noticed something disturbing. She pointed to the footprints and said something had been bothering her all day. That's when I saw it. There were no shoe marks. Whoever had been outside our house, circling our windows, had been barefoot, in the middle of winter. My gut told me something was very, very wrong. We called my dad, who had lived in that house his whole life. He said he'd never seen anything like it. He told me to grab my rifle and track down whoever had left the prints. I didn't want to, but it was my responsibility. My girlfriend wanted to call the police, but I knew they wouldn't take footprints seriously unless a crime had been committed. So, I went into the woods alone. The footprints led deep into the forest, and I followed them for nearly 30 minutes before I stopped. Cold. The trail had split into 2. Someone or something had either doubled back to confuse me, or there were 2 of them. The realization sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't like my odds. I turned back. That was the last strange incident for a few years. My girlfriend and I got engaged and we moved on with life. Until last year. One morning in January, I stepped outside and saw the footprints again, and this time they led to my shed. Tools were missing. This wasn't just some barefoot wanderer anymore. Someone had stolen from me. And if they were bold enough to do that, what would stop them from breaking into the house? I called my friend Theo, an experienced hunter, and asked for his help. He arrived with his rifle and thermal scope, ready to track whoever had been lurking around. We followed the footprints deep into the forest, deeper than I had ever gone before. The sun started setting, but Theo's thermal scope helped us see. Then, something strange happened. The footprints started getting deeper, like we were catching up to whoever we were following. Then another set of prints appeared. "There's more than one," Theo whispered. Darkness fell. We kept going. Then, suddenly, Theo grabbed my arm, stopping me in my tracks. He raised his rifle, looking through the scope. I saw his hand tremble. He motioned for me to crouch behind a tree. I took the rifle and looked through the scope. I almost screamed. There were 4 figures huddled in the snow, naked, their skin pale against the darkness. 2 were large, hunched over, while the other 2 clung to a tree, twitching and jerking their heads. They were eating something. I couldn't see details through the thermal scope, but the way they moved wasn't human. Their heads snapped unnaturally fast. The larger ones picked up the smaller ones, carrying them deeper into the woods. Theo and I didn't move for an hour. When we finally made it back to the house, my fiancée was still awake, sick with worry. We told her what we saw, leaving out the worst details. We called the police. They searched the woods but found nothing. The footprints were covered by fresh snow. With no evidence of a crime, they couldn't keep looking. Winter is coming again, and I don't know what to do. We've talked about moving, but it's not that simple. What if these things follow us? No one else in the neighborhood has ever reported anything like this. It's as if whatever is out there only wants us. I don't know if they're people. I don't know what they want. But I know they'll be back.